The clown killer's 33 victims. John Wayne Gacy shocks the United States. The suburban sprawl of Norwood Park Township, Illinois, in the late 1970s, epitomized the American dream. Neat lawns, two-story houses, and a pervasive sense of safety that bordered on complacency. In this idyllic tableau, John Wayne Gacy was, to all outward appearances, a pillar of the community. A portly, jovial man with a booming laugh and an affable demeanor, he ran a successful construction company, PDM Contractors, known for its efficiency and fair prices. He was a dedicated family man, married with children, though his first marriage had ended a few years prior. He was a precinct captain for the Democratic Party, a respected member of the local Lions Club, and a tireless organizer of charity events. Most famously, Gacy was beloved by local children for his alter ego, Pogo the Clown, or sometimes Patches the Clown, characters he enthusiastically portrayed at children's hospitals, fundraisers, and neighborhood parties. His performances were legendary. Balloon animals, magic tricks, and a warm, comforting presence that put even the shyest child at ease. He embodied the very essence of neighborly charm and civic duty. Yet, beneath this meticulously crafted veneer of normalcy and benevolence, a monstrous darkness festered. John Wayne Gacy harbored a collection of violent sexual fantasies, a deeply entrenched sadism, and a chilling compulsion to dominate and torture. These urges, rooted in a tormented childhood marked by an abusive, alcoholic father and a pervasive sense of inadequacy, had simmered for years, occasionally boiling over into discreet, often unreported acts of violence. He had already served time in Iowa for sodomy and assault in the late 1960s, a fact carefully concealed from his new community in Illinois. He had returned to Chicago, rebuilt his life with ruthless efficiency, and meticulously constructed the public persona of John Wayne Gacy, the upstanding citizen, a fortress designed to hide the burgeoning serial killer within. The early victims were young men, often drifters, runaways, or those struggling with addiction, who were largely invisible to society. They were easy targets, their disappearances unlikely to attract significant attention from authorities or concerned families. Gacy preyed on their vulnerability, offering them jobs, a place to stay, or simply a ride. His construction business provided the perfect cover. He often hired young men for odd jobs, bringing them back to his house at 8213 Summerdale Avenue, a sprawling ranch-style home with a large backyard. The house itself became the epicenter of his horrifying activities, a tomb disguised as a home. Gacy's modus operandi, which evolved into a terrifying ritual, began with luring his victims under false pretenses. He'd offer them a drink, often laced with sedatives. Once incapacitated, he would bind and torture them, fulfilling his sadistic urges. The torture was prolonged, brutal, and designed to inflict maximum pain and humiliation. His fantasies, nurtured in the dark corners of his mind, became terrifying realities for his victims. The disposal of the bodies was Gacy's chilling secret, enabled by his construction expertise and the inherent privacy of his suburban property. He started by burying the bodies in shallow graves in his backyard, meticulously covering them up, often pouring quicklime or concrete over the makeshift burial sites to accelerate decomposition and hide the evidence. He worked tirelessly, often late into the night, using his own construction equipment to dig the graves, the sounds easily masked by the suburban hum or attributed to his ongoing home improvement projects. Neighbors, if they heard anything, simply assumed Gacy was working late, as a good, diligent contractor would. The first few disappearances went largely unnoticed. Families of runaways often reported them missing, but the police, overwhelmed by similar cases, had limited resources. Gacy, meanwhile, continued to play the role of the concerned citizen, sometimes even offering to help search for the missing boys, subtly deflecting suspicion and inserting himself into the periphery of investigations. He learned from each abduction, each disposal, refining his methods, growing bolder, more confident in his ability to evade detection. As the number of victims grew, Gacy faced a macabre challenge: space. His backyard, though sizable, was finite. He began to explore other disposal methods. The crawl space beneath his house, a dark, shallow void accessible from inside the house, became his primary burial ground. It was an ingenious, horrifying solution. He would drag the bodies, often still bound, down into the cramped, suffocating space, burying them within the dirt floor, sometimes just inches beneath the concrete slab that formed the foundation of his home. The smell, initially a concern, was addressed by Gacys' extensive use of air fresheners, chemicals, and by his clever deflection, blaming it on faulty plumbing or a general bachelor pad odor, which his trusting neighbors readily accepted. His double life was a masterclass in psychological compartmentalization. By day, he was John, the friendly neighbor, the dedicated contractor, the jovial pogo. He attended PTA meetings, went to church, hosted barbecues, his hands shaking hands with parents while those same hands had just, hours earlier, committed unspeakable acts. He thrived on the paradox, on the proximity of his monstrous self to the unsuspecting innocence of his community. The very act of portraying Pogo the Clown, a symbol of joy and childhood wonder, became a perverse form of concealment, a psychological shield against detection. Who would suspect a clown, a friend of children, of being a serial killer? The police, meanwhile, were struggling. Missing person reports for young men were piling up in the Chicago area, but without clear patterns or connections, they were treated as isolated incidents. There was no centralized database, no sophisticated profiling techniques like those used today. Detectives often dismissed these cases as runaways or drug-related disappearances, focusing their limited resources on what they perceived as higher priority crimes. Gacy knew this, exploited this systemic weakness, and continued his horrifying spree with impunity. The chilling reality was that Gacy was operating in plain sight, his construction vans driving through the neighborhood, his tools being used for unspeakable purposes right under the noses of his unsuspecting neighbors. He even hosted a Christmas party for his employees and their families, with Pogo the Clown entertaining the children, while the remains of multiple victims lay buried just feet below their festive feet. The sheer audacity, the chilling normalcy of his public life, was the most terrifying aspect of his charade. As the body count continued to rise, reaching into the double digits, Gacys' confidence swelled. He became more reckless, more daring. He started targeting men in the gay community, believing, correctly for the time, that their disappearances would be met with even less police scrutiny, often dismissed by families reluctant to admit their sons were gay. He picked up victims from bus stations, from gay bars in Chicago, promising them jobs, a place to stay, a kind word, anything to lure them back to Summerdale Avenue, to the House of Horrors. The pressure on Gacy, though self-imposed, began to mount. The sheer number of bodies, the dwindling space, the faint but persistent odors, they were constant reminders of his crimes. He often worked late into the night, consumed by the grim task of burying his victims, sometimes struggling with the weight of the bodies, the cramped conditions of the crawl space. He felt a perverse sense of accomplishment, a terrifying mastery over life and death, but also a growing paranoia that he would eventually be discovered. Yet, he maintained his charade flawlessly. He complained about the smell to neighbors, speculating about sewer issues. He hosted barbecues, letting children play in the very backyard where bodies were buried. He continued his community work, his political activism, endearing himself to local officials and law enforcement alike. John Wayne Gacy was not just a serial killer. He was a master manipulator, an architect of deception, building a monstrous secret right in the heart of the American dream, a secret that would soon shatter the illusion of safety and leave an indelible mark of horror on a nation. The stage was set for a terrifying unraveling, and the clown's performance was nearing its final, bloody act. The winter of 1978 brought a chilling, palpable tension to Norwood Park. The cheerful facade of John Wayne Gacy, the benevolent Pogo the Clown, began to fray at the edges, not from any internal failing on his part, but from the cumulative weight of his horrific secrets and the relentless, if often misguided, efforts of those desperately searching for their lost loved ones. The sheer volume of missing young men in the Chicago area was finally starting to draw more official attention, even if no single pattern had yet emerged to connect them directly to Gacy. The decisive crack in Gacy's carefully constructed world appeared on December 11, 1978, with the disappearance of Robert Piest, a 15-year-old high school student. Robert had gone to a local pharmacy to inquire about a part-time job and told his mother he would be back shortly. He was last seen talking to John Gacys, who had approached him with an offer of work at his construction company. Unlike many of Gacys' previous victims, Robert Piest was a good kid from a stable, loving home. His parents were immediately alarmed and tenacious in their pursuit of answers. They reported him missing promptly and provided the police with detailed information, including the fact that Robert was last seen with Gacys. Detective David Hamer, a shrewd and determined officer from the Des Plaines Police Department, was assigned to the case. From the outset, something about John Gacys didn't sit right with Hamer. Gacys' initial cooperation was almost too eager, his alibis a little too perfectly rehearsed. When questioned about Robert Piest, Gacys claimed he had interviewed the boy at the pharmacy, but that Robert had left on his own. He even offered to help search for Robert, a typical Gacys maneuver to deflect suspicion and insert himself into the investigation. But Hamer wasn't easily swayed. He noted Gacys' slight evasiveness when pressed for details, the almost imperceptible shifts in his demeanor that betrayed a deeper secret. Hamer's investigation began with Gacys' residence at 8213 Somerdale Avenue. When officers arrived at the house, they were immediately struck by a faint, cloying odor, a sickly sweet smell that seemed to permeate the property. Gacys, ever the master of deflection, attributed it to faulty plumbing and dead mice in the walls. He even produced containers of air fresheners, strategically placed around the house, to substantiate his claim. The officers, though suspicious, had no immediate grounds for a search warrant. They left, but the smell, and Gacys' unnaturally cheerful explanations, lingered in Hamer's mind. The police began conducting surveillance on Gacys' home. Detectives observed his unusual nighttime activities. Gacys, sometimes alone, sometimes with employees, frequently moving dirt and debris around the property in the dead of night, often in his distinctive white construction van. They noted his frequent trips to hardware stores, purchasing large quantities of quicklime and plastic sheeting. These seemingly innocuous activities, when viewed through the lens of a missing person investigation, began to paint a disturbing picture. Meanwhile, Hamer continued to probe Gacys' background. He discovered Gacys' prior conviction in Iowa, a crucial piece of information that painted a far darker portrait of the seemingly respectable contractor. This history, combined with the strange smell and the nighttime activities, strengthened Hamer's conviction that Gacys was hiding something sinister. He began to suspect that Robert Piest's disappearance was not an isolated incident. The police obtained a search warrant for Gacys' home on December 21, 1978. As soon as they entered, the putrid odor hit them with full force, undeniable and overwhelming. It was the smell of decay, of death, a stench that clung to every surface. Gacys, still attempting to maintain his composure, continued to offer flimsy explanations. But the officers knew. They began their systematic search, their faces grim, their senses assaulted by the horrific reality. The first few days of the search were focused on the backyard. They began digging, following the subtle depressions in the soil, the areas where the ground felt disturbed. The discovery of the first few bodies was a moment of horrific confirmation. The partially decomposed remains, often bound and gagged, told a story of unspeakable cruelty. Gacys, watching the excavations, remained outwardly calm, though the mask of the jovial contractor was beginning to slip, revealing fleeting glimpses of panic in his eyes. He claimed ignorance, expressed shock, even feigned sympathy for the victims. But the backyard burials were only the beginning. The smell was strongest inside the house, particularly in the living room. Following the scent, officers discovered a small, almost undetectable crawl space entrance, hidden beneath a floor vent. It was a dark, narrow opening, leading into a suffocatingly confined void beneath the house. The moment they opened it, the stench became unbearable, a concentrated miasma of death that made even hardened officers recoil. What they found within the crawl space defied comprehension. It was a mass grave, a horrifying labyrinth of human remains, bodies piled on top of each other, wrapped in plastic, buried shallowly in the dirt floor. The sheer number of victims, the callousness of their disposal, was a scene of unparalleled horror. The realization dawned on the investigators. This wasn't just about Robert Piest. This was about a prolific serial killer who had been operating undetected for years, right in the heart of their community. Gacy, confronted with the overwhelming evidence, finally broke. Under intense interrogation, he confessed, slowly at first, then in a torrent of chilling detail. He admitted to killing multiple young men, describing his methods, his disposal techniques, his chilling detachment. He meticulously drew diagrams of his house, marking the locations of each burial, almost as if he were proud of his macabre architecture. He often referred to the victims as leftovers or garbage, betraying a profound dehumanization that chilled the most seasoned detectives. He detailed his ritual, the luring of victims, the torture, the sexual assault, and the eventual strangulation. He spoke of the accidents he orchestrated to dispose of bodies in the Des Plaines River, unable to fit any more into his crammed crawl space. He confessed to disguising himself as Pogo the Clown to lure some victims, a perverse twist that added another layer of horror to his crimes. The jovial community man, the beloved clown, was unmasked as a sadistic monster, a predator who hid in plain sight. The revelation sent shockwaves through Norwood Park and across the United States. The news cycles were dominated by the unfolding horror from Somerdale Avenue. The Clown Killer, as the media dubbed him, became a household name, a chilling symbol of the unseen evil that could lurk beneath the veneer of suburban normalcy. Parents hugged their children tighter, neighbors looked at each other with newfound suspicion, and the collective sense of security in America's small towns was irrevocably shattered. The gruesome excavation of Gacys' property continued for weeks, a macabre archaeological dig. The media camped outside the house, their cameras broadcasting the chilling images of forensic teams carefully removing body after body. The total count mounted steadily. 29 bodies found on the property, 26 in the crawl space, 3 in the backyard. For more victims were later found in the Des Plaines River, bringing the total number of confirmed victims to 33. The sheer scale of his crimes was unprecedented in American history, marking him as one of the most prolific serial killers the nation had ever seen. The discovery of the bodies was not just a police investigation. It was a national trauma. The victims, once anonymous missing persons, were now given names, their stories heartbreakingly pieced together through dental records, personal effects, and the tireless efforts of forensic anthropologists. Families who had lived for years with unanswered questions finally received the grim truth, though closure came at the agonizing price of unimaginable grief. John Wayne Gacy, the upstanding community member, the friendly Pogo the Clown, was fully exposed as a depraved sadist, a cold-blooded killer who had meticulously built his house of horrors brick by brick, body by body. The cracks in his facade had finally widened, revealing the monstrous void within and shaking the foundations of American innocence forever. The search for the missing was over, replaced by a desperate need to comprehend the depths of human evil, a horror brought to life by the cheerful charade of a murderous clown. The trial of John Wayne Gacy in early 1980 was not merely a legal proceeding. It was a national reckoning with the depths of human depravity. The world watched, mesmerized and horrified, as the man who had embodied community spirit was systematically unmasked as one of history's most prolific and sadistic serial killers. The courtroom in Chicago became a theater of the grotesque, a chilling tableau where the mundane details of daily life intersected with unspeakable acts of violence. Gacy's legal team, led by defense attorney Sam Amarant, pursued a defense of insanity. They argued that Gacy suffered from a dissociative identity disorder, claiming that a separate, evil personality named Jack was responsible for the murders, while the good John Gacy was unaware of these heinous acts. They presented him as a victim of his own mental illness, not a cold-blooded killer. However, the prosecution, led by William Kunkel Jr., meticulously dismantled the insanity defense. They presented a mountain of damning evidence: the detailed confessions, Gacy's precise diagrams of the burial sites, the overwhelming forensic evidence from the crawl space and backyard, and the testimony of several men who had narrowly escaped Gacys' clutches, describing his cunning and premeditation. They highlighted Gacys' meticulous planning, his elaborate methods of luring victims, his systematic disposal of bodies, and his chilling ability to maintain a perfectly normal public persona throughout his crime spree. This, the prosecution argued, was not the work of a fractured mind, but of a calculating, intelligent, and utterly evil individual fully aware of his actions. The testimony from the few survivors was particularly harrowing. They recounted their terrifying encounters with Gacy, his initial charm quickly morphing into sadistic violence. Their accounts painted a vivid, disturbing picture of the monster behind the friendly facade, directly contradicting the defense's portrayal of a deluded, unaware individual. One of the most impactful pieces of evidence was Gacy's own chilling admissions during interrogation. He often spoke of his victims with chilling detachment, referring to them as garbage or leftovers, revealing a profound lack of empathy. His calm, almost instructional descriptions of his methods, devoid of any discernible remorse, further eroded the credibility of the insanity defense. The image of Pogo the Clown, once a symbol of joy, was now synonymous with terror, forever tainted by the unspeakable acts committed by the man behind the painted smile. The prosecution also presented evidence of Gacys' attempts to manipulate and mislead authorities even after his arrest. He frequently changed his story, feigned memory loss, and attempted to bargain for reduced charges. This behavior further solidified the prosecution's argument that Gacy was not insane, but a cunning sociopath who understood the consequences of his actions and was desperate to avoid them. On March 13, 1980, after a 6-week trial and less than 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty on all 33 counts of murder. The courtroom erupted with a collective gasp of relief and a quiet murmur of satisfaction. Gacy himself remained impassive, his face betraying little emotion. 2 days later, the jury recommended the death penalty. John Wayne Gacy was sentenced to death for 12 of the murders, with concurrent life sentences for the remaining 21. The conviction brought a semblance of closure to the devastated families of the victims, though their grief was unending. The public, however, grappled with the profound implications of Gacy's crimes. How could such a monster exist in their midst? How could a man so seemingly normal, so deeply embedded in the community, be capable of such unspeakable evil? The case ignited a national debate about the nature of evil, the effectiveness of law enforcement, and the terrifying reality that monsters don't always lurk in the shadows. Sometimes, they wear a clown's smile and live next door. The legacy of John Wayne Gacy extended far beyond the courtroom. His crimes forced a reevaluation of missing persons protocols across the country. Police departments began to share information more effectively, to look for patterns in seemingly unrelated disappearances, and to take every missing person report, regardless of the individual's background, with the utmost seriousness. The concept of serial killer, though already existing, became a chilling reality for the average American, leading to increased awareness and a societal shift in how seemingly harmless individuals were perceived. For the victims' families, the scars ran deep. Decades later, many still struggled with the trauma, the lingering questions, and the horrifying knowledge of what their loved ones endured. The efforts to identify all 33 victims continued for years, even after Gacy's conviction. As forensic technology advanced, more remains were identified, bringing belated, agonizing closure to families who had waited decades for answers. The last of Gacy's unidentified victims was finally identified in 2021, a testament to the enduring commitment of law enforcement and forensic scientists. Gacy spent 14 years on death row, maintaining his innocence at times, at others making chilling, contradictory statements. He even continued to paint, producing grotesque clown portraits and other disturbing artwork from his prison cell, often selling them to morbid collectors, further solidifying his macabre legend. He became a subject of intense psychological study, a case study in sociopathy and the darkest reaches of the human psyche. On May 10, 1994, John Wayne Gacy was executed by lethal injection at Stateville Correctional Center in Illinois. His final words were, "Kiss my ass." His death brought a final, definitive end to his reign of terror, but it could not erase the profound scars he left on the lives of his victims, their families, and the collective American consciousness. The story of John Wayne Gacy, the clown killer with 33 victims, remains a chilling reminder of the fragility of safety, the insidious nature of hidden evil, and the enduring power of a carefully constructed charade. He shocked the United States not just with the sheer volume of his murders, but with the terrifying realization that the monster could be the friendly face next door, the pillar of the community, the jovial clown entertaining children. His legacy is a grim warning, a permanent stain on the American dream, an eternal echo of the horror that can emerge from the most unexpected places. The clown's final bow left an indelible mark, a chilling reminder that sometimes, the most terrifying monsters are those who wear the most convincing disguises.